Hello, viewers. Welcome to another episode of the Free Marketeers vlog. We haven't done one in a while now. We missed last week. I guess we were all too busy with fighting the cause for liberty and free markets here at the FMF. And by the time the clock hit 5, we were like, oh, by the way, we missed our podcast. We planned to discuss the expropriation process and the amendment to the Constitution and the new sport bill last week, but since they're still as topical this week, we thought we'd go into them anyway. So as always, I'm Martin van Staden, this is Jacques Jonker, and this is Chris Hattingh. We're all with the FMF. And so let's get into it. I guess the most worrying thing has been for the last 2.5 years or what is expropriation. The public participation process, or the written submissions portion of it at least, ended at the end of February. I think that we're going to see the same results we saw during the ad hoc, the Constitutional Review Committee process, in that most written submissions are probably going to be against EWC. Because we know the official opposition in Parliament delivered something like 90,000 submissions, presumably all against. We know some think tanks have delivered hundreds of thousands.
Yeah, how many did Darius A have?
I think it's something in the region of like 600,000 probably.
Yeah, that was the one really big one, I remember.
And they said that most of them are anti-EWC. And then I think the roadshow that has now started, that the committee is going to take around the country, is also going to appear to be more in favor of EWC, because we know the proponents of EWC on the committee bus in their supporters and then they shout down opponents. So I think that's going to be the result of that. I mean, it's morbid, but it seems like EWC is coming. I don't know, Jacques, if you have any more concerns or anything that we haven't covered before in a Free Marketeers vlog.
No, I think everything's been covered. But yes, I do think it is coming. Especially with a lot of legal scholars out there saying the Constitution already allows for it, which it doesn't. I'm not very optimistic in that respect. I think it is really coming and it's upon us. Yes.
Yeah, and what the FMF recently did in part of our campaign is we got some of our partners from around the world to sign an open letter to President Ramaphosa, and it's kind of like a petition, really outlining the issues with EWC and why it should be abandoned. Maybe you want to discuss that a bit, Chris?
Yeah, so 23 international think tanks and organizations signed the open letter. These include organizations from all over the world, including places such as Venezuela, where EWC in their form has occurred, and they can speak very strongly to its devastating effects on their people and on their country. It's interesting, maybe, or maybe not interesting from our perspective, but just that it's sort of official that we are in a recession, and we're going ahead with something like EWC, and then in a few years we'll be all upset and surprised that there are now 30 million unemployed or 20 million, or take your pick. And we'll wonder, how did we get to this point? We just need a turnaround strategy, or we need an investment conference, or something like that. So just on the going back to the letter, it's obviously gratifying, and we want to thank everyone who signed the letter to see that sort of support against EWC, for the cause of individual liberty, of individual property rights for all South Africans. So thank you very much to the organizations that signed that letter.
Yeah, and we're in the process of releasing a book on expropriation without compensation, which mostly consists of papers delivered at the FMF's EWC conference, which we held in, November 2018. Yeah. So there we had representatives from all around the world again, but mostly Africa. So Zimbabwe, Ghana, Nigeria, Kenya, Burundi, I believe, were and Egypt also submitted a paper, although they unfortunately couldn't make it to the conference. And also we had representatives from Venezuela, the United States, India, and I think the participants in the audience included people from Namibia and Botswana, etc. So there's a very broad-based, I think, consensus of people who have experienced EWC before, at least. So not necessarily of people in general, because a lot of people have never experienced it, but those who have gone through it somewhere in the world, I think all agree that it's a bad idea.
Yeah.
I mean, to put it quite moderately, it's a disastrous idea, because the moment you remove protections for property rights, all ideas of investment and development go out the window, because there's no point in you investing your hard-earned money, your effort, and your time in anything if you can just wake up the next morning and a politician says, "Oh, this is mine now."
Yeah.
So all bets are off, mostly, I think, of EWC.
And I think it's important to reinforce the point that it really can be any politician.
Yeah.
So I understand for many people in the ruling party, for example, they think that their party will govern for the next 1,000 years or longer.
Yeah.
But maybe not, and the point is, once this change is made, any party that comes into power, I know the likelihood is very small, but let's assume a hardcore right-wing Afrikaner party that wants to revive stuff from previous decades comes into power, then they can use that power in the constitution. So if you open yourself up to this sort of abuse and risk, you're really setting yourself up for massive abuses and devastating consequences in the future.
Yeah, and I mean, it's not necessarily on a national level. So with this new power to expropriate without compensation, it's going to be a constitutional principle now. So maybe the Northern Cape gets taken over by a radical party, not necessarily national government, and then they target their political opponents, which may actually include the governing party of the country. But even then, within the context of the party, the governing party itself, you have people working on municipal level. So it's not necessarily President Ramaphosa who is going to come to your farm or whatever and say, "I'm expropriating this." It's going to be a local official who says that, "Wow, we want to build a new power line for, or we want to build wind turbines on your property, so we're expropriating your farm for that." And now that they're not required to pay compensation anymore, a significant safeguard is gone. So we're not saying that all safeguards are gone. There are still constitutional due process requirements to go through, but this is a significant safeguard that's being taken away, and it almost sets a precedent to say that, well, we've done it before, we've removed safeguards, and well, things didn't go totally wrong. Like the economy just kind of collapsed, but we're still here, so let's try something else and maybe take away the other constitutional safeguards, maybe take away some of the limitations, requirements for justifying a limitation, and make it easier for government to limit other rights like freedom of expression. So the whole thing, I mean, is perverse. If you look at each thing in isolation, it won't necessarily be a disaster, but if you take it from a constitutional, social, cultural, and political perspective, an economic perspective, obviously, it's disastrous.
Well, that's how tyranny comes about, right? It's always in small steps. Maybe not romanticized in a good way, but maybe we have a conception, a popular conception that it's, overnight it can happen with, people in the streets, that kind of thing, guns and that sort of thing. But it also happens step by step, and this is a big step on that road, as you highlighted, I think.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think, as Jacques mentioned, there's this idea that the Constitution already allows for expropriation without compensation, and this is exactly what you just said, what happened. So when the Constitution was enacted in 1996, no one would have said that, it allows for expropriation without compensation. But in the meantime, the government has done certain things, for instance, expropriate mineral rights without compensation, and through terribly convoluted, sophisticated perversion of jurisprudence, the Constitutional Court came to a conclusion that, hey, you may be able to expropriate property without compensation. And now legal scholars are like, yeah, you can. It's like, wow, so what really changed? The Constitution hasn't been amended, but suddenly we have this new power. So yeah, it does happen in these steps that to ordinary people is not visible. You don't know it's happening, but it's always there, and that's why you need a real culture of constitutionalism. People need to really believe in the values of the Constitution and protect it. Unfortunately, I don't think we have that in South Africa, and I think we're gonna pay for that dearly in years and decades to come. So anything else on EWC?
Just one argument I'd like to address when people say, yeah, well, the government technically can expropriate without compensation when a criminal steals something and the government, the police takes it back.
Yeah.
That is an axiomatically flawed argument because you're assuming that the criminal had some sort of property right to the stolen property.
Sure.
Expropriation is applicable to where property rights are already legitimately established.
Right.
Yes. Yeah.
When government takes, say, a criminal takes over your house, kicks you out, just this is a weird extreme example, but it just brings the point across. When government takes that property back from the criminal, they're not expropriating the property because there was no right to the property held by the criminal in the first place. So this is not applicable to when things are legitimately stolen. And when people were driven off their land, mostly people of color during apartheid in South Africa, the group areas like the Native Land Act, etc., then that is called restitution. That process that you go through in order to give those people either their land back or to compensate them if they don't want the land itself. In that case, there is a process of restitution. And if the current owner was the one who actually took the property, then they don't have any legitimate right to that property.
Absolutely.
So expropriation without compensation, that was really taken, but they don't have to compensate the criminal for it. So people are thinking when we say, okay, so expropriation without compensation means the government can't take anything from actual criminals without expropriating them. No, it's not applicable to when there's an actual criminal still in possession of the property, but without the legitimate property right itself.
Yeah, no, you bring up an insanely important point. I mean, all of us, and I think everyone in the pro-property rights movement who are against expropriation without compensation are 100% on board with the restitution process.
Yes,
and
definitely.
And the point is, our law has, our common law at least, has always recognized this, our Roman Dutch common law. So when government takes property from, for lack of a better word, a dispossessor, a thief, and gives it to the actual owner, that's called vindication. It's not it's not expropriation. You're not expropriating it. You're just handing it back to who it belongs. And a lot of people who favor EWC say that that is all that's happening right now. But that's not. The amendment is it's a page long. All of you can go and read it. It's very easy to understand. Nowhere does it say that government may only take property with or without compensation, whatever, that has been taken coercively by criminals or the former government. It says none of that. The EWC amendment says that seizing property without compensation is now possible, number one. And number two, Parliament may define in legislation under which circumstances the courts may find that no compensation is payable. That is what the EWC amendment does. The word dispossession doesn't come up. The word theft doesn't come up. The word criminal doesn't come up. The word restitution does not come up. So that is not what EWC is about. It's not justice. We all support redress, justice, restitution. But that is not what government is doing. And it's important for any civil society, if you're at all involved in the political discourse of your country, to always mistrust whatever government is doing. Whatever it is, no matter how noble it may seem, you need to be suspicious. Because government always, number one, wants to protect itself and its power. That is the first objective of any government, no matter how limited it is. That will always be their first objective, protect the power that we have.
Protect and increase that.
Yes, exactly. And that is what they're doing. Now, I wrote in an article for the Foundation for Economic Education recently that one of the hypothesized reasons for what government is doing now is that it's increasingly losing its hold on power. This is something that has happened throughout Africa, unfortunately, in that central governments, after years of misrule, only control the urban areas. And the rural areas, the country has basically just fallen to mob violence and maybe to communal governments, etc. And our government is now in, maybe it's the early stages, but they're saying let's grab as much power and institutionalize ourselves as much as possible to ensure that if we lose real control over the rest of the country, we can regain it quickly. And I mean, EWC isn't the only instance of this. Another one, which is the second topic of today, is the National Sport and Recreation Amendment Bill. Now, I'm not a sports guy. You may be able to see it here. I don't do any sports. I've never been interested in any sports. These guys definitely are, so they'll take over in a second. But
you've got your bodyguards next to you.
Yes. So when I started reading this thing, I I was actually flabbergasted about how brazen government is. Basically, just saying, "Oh yeah, we're nationalizing sport," by the way, and they're usually subtle in legislation. Not this time. They stop just short of saying that you can using words like conscription and seizure, but that's effectively what it is. Now, Jacques, I know you did one of the first read-throughs of the bill, preparing notes and so on. If you want to give us a rundown of some of the highlights.
Oh, it's extremely authoritarian. It is basically government saying, okay, so there's a person kicking a ball. We think we want a piece of that action, and now they are basically centralizing everything under the minister, and they are giving the minister of sports and recreation an extreme level of discretionary power. And fundamental imperative of the rule of law is when there's discretionary power in the law, it must be accompanied by objective criteria to guide that, but most importantly, limit the exercise of that discretionary power. So it's not just plain arbitrary. The bill doesn't provide for that. It simply says, as is the case with a lot of bills in South Africa, a lot of legislation simply says, unless the minister decides this, and the minister may decide this or that, and X and Y, etc., etc. But there's nothing to guide the minister in the exercise of their powers, or to limit them, rather. And another worrying aspect is the bill does not only apply to official professional sport, it applies to recreational activities as well. I mean, the scope of this bill is just massive. And I mean, if I remember correctly, there was a clause about penalizing persons, athletes who do not want to represent their national team for whatever reason. Again, it doesn't go into detail, just says, your government can screw you over if you decide not to play for the Springboks. I mean, this is in a country where we have excessive levels of, or extreme levels of murder, of rape, etc. But now they want to arrest somebody like Dwayne Vermeulen when one day he decides he wants to up his boots and not just simply play for the Springboks anymore for whatever reason. I mean, it's absolutely insane. And the consequences, like for instance being kicked out of the Olympics, maybe even being penalised or being kicked out by FIFA. I'm not sure Bafana are really an asset to FIFA, but
oh geez, throwing shade.
Well, we probably won't qualify for the World Cup anyway.
Probably won't qualify for the World Cup anyway. But the fact of the matter is this has massive repercussions for individual athletes. And another clause wants to implement control measures over foreign athletes coming to play for local sports teams. And I mean, in the Premier League in England, there are certain requirements set by the Premier League themselves.
Yeah, there's a quote on what foreign players...
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Jeez, England.
But the thing is, there it's not directly set by the Minister of Sports or whoever's in control of
it's the
sports.
Football Association, right?
I'm not sure, but the fact of the matter is, like, a private organisation can set those rules, and you should be free to leave that private organisation and go to another private organisation. And what this bill also wants to do is basically tell you, okay, so you are in South Africa, you are this club, you are in this federation, but all federations must abide by these regulations with respect to foreign players coming to play here. And you can't leave to another different regulatory body or federation rather within the borders of South Africa, because all of them are now under the control of the minister, and that's absolutely insane.
Do you have any highlights from the bill?
Well, a few. Number one is the possible effect on the fitness industry, which is massive in the country.
That's new.
Just if you think in terms of costs and logistics, how expensive it is to run one of those facilities. I know, for example, in a CrossFit gym, you need to pay thousands of dollars to CrossFit HQ in the US to be called a CrossFit gym. You need to pay to do your coaching license, all that sort of stuff. Then you need to pay for the facility, water, the weights, all that sort of stuff is very expensive. So now this sort of thing will impose more costs because you need to be registered. You need this license. You need.
Yeah, so the bill does that. It gives the minister the power. Like, that's actually the first time in a bill that I saw this. He may create a sport fitness industry fitness industry regulating authority. He may or he may not.
But
depending on the breakfast he ate that morning. So he has that power, and then fitness industry, and I think that includes gyms and everything, are now being brought under the centralized control of this body, or alternatively of the minister if he doesn't create it. So it's...
So there was that, and then just... I was trying to think about some sort of rationalization on the part of government, which I guess we shouldn't do. But if it was a concern about standards and safety and that sort of thing, to be a trainer in a Virgin Active, you need to go through their own training program. for example, to work there.
Yeah.
So that's already been taken care of by that gym. If they don't train their trainers well enough, you can, if you injure yourself kind of thing, and it was their fault, then you can take them to court.
Yeah.
So that's already there. So really, this is reaching very deeply into South African lives. We know how important sport is to many South Africans, of course, not all. But then, as Jacques mentioned, the recreation side. So this can include video gaming, it can include archery, fishing.
Playing in a park with
Playing
your
in a park,
children is now a regulated
Yes.
activity. Yeah.
So everything under the sun, I don't know, when you run around on the grass by yourself is a recreation, I suppose.
Yes, yeah.
So it's
Absolutely.
insane when you think about how nanny state this is, but like nanny state, maybe that's too nice a word. It's just authoritarian
Yeah.
states, the level of control this bill can bring about, and it's deeply concerning. It's very, maybe it's another way for them to distract from other stuff. I don't know, or they're trying to get it under the table while we're focused on, for example, EWC and NHI. Just to talk about the national sports teams a bit, the transformation argument. We saw at the World Cup that the Springboks, for example, they've set quotas for transformation. They've achieved those quotas. Siya Kolisi was probably the best player at the World Cup. So for anyone who says, oh, he was only there because he was a quota player, to me, misses what a good player he is in any case. So organizations themselves, such as SARU, Cricket South Africa, Athletics South Africa is a mess, so we'll leave them alone. But cricket and rugby, they're trying to transform. And I think it's much more a case of you need to see it, investment in grassroots and it coming from the bottom up instead of it being imposed by this sort of bill. If the minister says the Springboks must be 100% African, for example, that'll simply discourage a lot of, I think, white and African players from playing. It's going to have a very disastrous effect on the quality of the national sports teams. Those organizations, if they don't want to transform, we should ostracize them. If we as a society believe that they should be 50% this or that or 80% whatever, and they don't, then you join a different organization, a different association. Society punishes them, as I think they ought to. But for government to...
The bill is now going to disallow that, actually. Disallow ostracizing, because SARU, for instance, which is not, it doesn't have a monopoly on rugby in South Africa, maybe effectively, but it can literally go to government now, or it probably should, under the bill, and say, we want to be the sole body for rugby in South Africa.
As controlled by World Rugby.
Yeah, and the bill says the minister must then grant that registration. So even if you don't like SARU anymore and you want to form a different rugby association and also try to compete for the tournament, you just can't. The law will prohibit you from doing that. So the bill monopolizes, in the hands of private organizations, mind you, so it monopolizes in the minister's central power over sports and recreation in general, but then at a different level monopolizes power in the hands of private associations, which is obviously not within the purview of what government is supposed to do.
Yeah, so then those organizations can be protected from competition.
Exactly.
Then it is a monopoly.
And then the most bizarre thing as well, where it also gives totally unreasonable powers to private organizations, is there's a provision that says if a player does not adhere to the regulations set by international sporting bodies, and that refers to private bodies like FIFA, the International Rugby Union or whatever, if you don't comply and you're a sports person, like you dope or whatever, you take steroids or whatever, you can be put in jail, in a South African jail, for up to 2 years. You can be arrested because you did not comply with the rules of a private club. So that's weird. So if you are the member of some club in Johannesburg or whatever, and you decide to smoke a cigarette and that's against the rules, not only can they kick you out, but you can go to jail for violating their rules.
But I mean, Martin, there's supposed to be a dividing line between public criminal law and private law?
Yeah, absolutely.
So this sort of basically says, well, screw all tradition in law, very valid traditions are there for a reason. We're just gonna go forth with our authoritarian master plan to socially engineer South Africa.
Well, we know we can't conduct ourselves in a moral manner, so government needs to tell us how we need to behave.
It's bizarre because everyone who participates in sports, I guess you can make an argument they take sports seriously. They have a passion for it. So all these bodies that already exist and compete with each other, they train their coaches, like you said, they train their instructors, they have these processes. Now that all falls away now. Now I heard a story recently that the Volleyball Federation, for instance, it has its own strict guidelines and procedures on coaching, on how to conduct yourself. It's a totally private organization. But now that falls away.
Yes.
Now you have to pay money. You have to pay a so-called subscription fee to if the minister deems it appropriate to create the Fitness Industry Regulatory Authority. You have to pay a subscription fee to them and be a member of theirs and be registered and licensed. So it's another way for government to make money, but now all these rules that private organizations already have for training and so on, that falls away because government knows better, apparently. Apparently we trust the minister to prescribe to people who have been doing this for decades how to engage in these things.
Can you imagine this bureaucracy? You know, when any of us have to go to the licensing department, for example, we all just, you have to put a whole day aside for that sort of thing. This is going to bring exactly that sort of situation in sport.
Yeah.
So it's going to discourage, to me, so many people from playing any sport, amateur sport, professional sport, and so much for government encouraging a healthy lifestyle, that sort of thing. Such as they did under the Obama administration in America, where they did their Get Kids Moving program. Here it's just going to be a case of, well, if you want to do this, you're really going to have to jump through many, many hoops and pay lots of money, and then maybe you'll get in if the minister so decides, he or she. So just as EWC increases the power of the government, so too does the sports bill.
This sports bill takes it to a level that I have, in my time working at the FMF, never seen before. I have never seen this extent of a single power grab. Like you see over a period of time, government grabbing power, but this bill, it goes from 10% to 100% in one go. It's totally insane.
I also just wanted to highlight the bidding for international sports events.
Yes.
So then again, if you want to bid for an international event, for example, the World Cup, any of the World Cups, you have to make sure that this is all in writing, submitted to the minister in good time, that he or she knows about it, that it's all approved by the relevant authorities or boards that he or she might set up, all that kind of thing. So I don't know who would want to follow that kind of process.
It's not just that. It says that if any sports and recreation body wants to bid or host an international event, it has to go through this process. So the smallest, imagine, if you will, the smallest rugby club or soccer club in South Africa.
Or a darts club.
Yeah, a darts club, a billiards or pool club. They want to have a gathering of 25 people from around the world at some bar in Randburg. And people are coming down to have some fun over a weekend. You have to apply to the minister. You have to apply to the minister to get permission to have some of your friends over to do a casual tournament. I mean, it must only leave you speechless that government is even busy with a thing like this. And one of the other best parts of it is that we were talking about transformation, redress, representativity, and what's the other word? It's one of these transformation buzzwords. Must be promoted in sport and recreation.
Yes.
So when you get to the public park with your children, there's going to be a big sign that says at any one time there may not be more than X number of whites, X number of blacks playing at this park.
It's going to be like if you go into one of the parking garages at the Hyde Park, Sandton or whatever, or at the airport, and it tells you which floors have available spots. So it's going to say we've got 50 out of 100 black people, so 50 more can come in. 10 out of 20 white people, so 10 more can come in.
So redress and representativity have to be promoted in recreation now. That is the newest thing in this totally absurd alternative reality that we find ourselves in. And of course, just a final thing, all sport bodies must promote government priorities. It literally says must promote government priorities. So amongst these are government's foreign policy goals, social build, what's it called?
Social cohesion.
Social cohesion and nation building.
Yeah.
So ideology and politics has never been particularly welcome in sport. This bill just shoves it in there, like 100%. Sport is now a nationalized industry in South Africa. It is now, you are now as a coach, as a player, you are effectively a government employee. You are an unpaid civil servant.
I wrote an article on this week. You can find that on our website. But just at the start, I just highlighted that the bill, the sort of power that it gives the minister is just, for example, he could tell Siya Kolisi, you have to play cricket for South Africa. This is a national call to serve your country and to play cricket.
Yeah.
So if you're worried about our performances of the cricket and rugby teams, just wait. Wait for this to come into enforcement. It's going to be very interesting. I, for one, look forward to seeing Chad Leclerc on the rugby field, but let's see how that goes.
And people need to remember, all these people that say now, but realistically, that will never happen. No, what you need to do is when government passes a bill, you need to look at the most extreme situation. Even if the probability is as low as 1%, if that bill allows that situation to materialize, whether it's only 1 in 100 chance of actually happening, that bill is rubbish. It should be scrapped, because this is the level of interference that government will eventually reach, because you give them a pinky, they take the hand, they take the forearm, they take the arm, and eventually the cancer spreads to the whole body. So when we use extreme examples like quotas for playing in a park, or Siya Kolisi put in the Proteas, or being arrested for refusing to play for the Boks, it's not, the chances of it actually happening might not be that high, but the fact that it's very, very possible that it can happen, because people need to distinguish between something, whether it's probable and whether it's possible. Now, disregard probability now. If it's possible, it's a problem. And it is possible under this bill. That is the issue.
In the late 1990s, opponents of Hugo Chavez in Venezuela were warning people against electing this guy. And what they told them, what they told the opponents is, Venezuela is not Cuba. It will not happen here. And we've heard that story across the world. People thought it was too absurd to believe that Germany was literally exterminating a whole population. They did not believe it until they got to the concentration camps and saw it. It can happen. It can happen, and you should always expect that it will happen, because otherwise there's no point in civil society and in institutions. Always assume the very, very worst and prepare for that. And if it doesn't happen, that's good, but it probably won't happen, because we expected it to happen and we guarded against it happening. That is the only guarantee. Yeah, I think that's all for the last 2 weeks.
A ridiculous note.
Yeah.
Of the sports bill. It really,
Yeah, and Chris and I will be doing an event on the sports bill on the 25th of March, here at the Free Market Foundation in Bryanston. So if you want to get more detail from us on that, please attend. We will be sending out invites very soon, and it will be on our website where you can RSVP. And yeah, please join us. But as always, thank you for tuning in, I guess, for another vlog episode of the Free Marketeers. Please remember to subscribe to this YouTube channel. We are still looking for a podcast platform to put this on a podcast format. We're not there yet, but for now, please subscribe. There's a big red button right under the video. Visit our Facebook page, that is Free Market Foundation South Africa, or in the URL, facebook.com/FMFSA. Follow us on Twitter @FMF South Africa, one word, or the URL, twitter.com/FMF South Africa. And of course, our website is www.freemarketfoundation.com, where you can find all of our latest submissions, articles, reports, and events. And please have a good weekend. We'll catch you again next week. Cheers.